Hi again then guys, and welcome to the 10th pick in my selection of vehicles which are of course in my wish list for a future Gran Turismo title, be it GT7, possibly GT Sport, but for the majority of the cars in this list that seems highly unlikely. These are, for the most part, more the kind of cars that would be featured on a larger Gran Turismo game, and from what we've seen so far, there's a reasonable chance that GT Sport may well turn out to be a smaller game, more of an offshoot of the Gran Turismo brand, rather than the next big game. Kind of like what Forza Horizon is for the Forza franchise, more of an offshoot from the norm. And that's actually not an unprecedented thing from Polyphony either, because they did make Tourist Trophy, which was essentially the motorbike equivalent of Gran Turismo. Now, many of the picks in my series are vehicles which are relatively unlikely to be featured in the series, to be completely honest. But at the end of the day, they're still great cars to talk about. They're often cars which many people haven't heard of, or many people may have seen in pictures or heard references of, but don't really know why they're respected so much. Cars like the Brabham BT46B, which we featured before in the series. Other cars though, like the Ferrari FF, the Espace F1 and some others, are pretty well known, and some of them are very widely loved and would be obvious choices and very popular, very well supported choices of car to be on Gran Turismo. The kind of cars which, when you fire up your copy of Gran Turismo 7 for the first time and you start looking, or at least I would, through the brand new car dealership sections, you would be over the moon to see these cars featured on the game. This is one of those cars. It's a car which has never been featured in the Gran Turismo franchise. It's from a company which has some cars on Gran Turismo, but not all that many, and the ones that are featured aren't all that good. It's a Chrysler. The Chrysler ME-Four Twelve. Now the ME-Four Twelve refers to mid-engine, 4 turbos, 12 cylinders. And that's actually very similar to something that Bugatti did with the first generation Veyron, which was of course called the EB16.4. And some people who are perhaps into cars but not necessarily petrol heads may assume, and you can kind of understand why, that the 16.4 refers to the engine size, which would be absolutely insane if that were the case. Of course it doesn't. It refers to Ettore Bugatti, who set up the company originally, 16 cylinders, 4 turbos, and in a similar way is the Chrysler. Mid-engined, 4 turbos, 12 cylinders, gives it its name. Now, that interestingly is not the only similarity between the ME-Four Twelve and the Veyron. They're actually far more similar than you'd think. They don't come from the same creative team, and they don't necessarily share any identical specs, but they have a lot of similarities. For a start, there's the look. The ME-Four Twelve is a very good looking car in my opinion, and in the opinion I know of a lot of other people. And it's a real shame that it never really got the chance that it deserved as a production supercar, but we'll get more into that in just a second. Visually though, especially if you're talking pure shape and silhouette, it's very similar to a Veyron. Now you can say that really about quite a few cars, but there are some supercars which really do look very, very similar to the Veyron. And the ME-Four Twelve is one of those. It has those large side intakes, a very large rounded front end, a relatively compact canopy around the driver with a large overhang either side from the bodywork, and quite a large back end with big hips sticking out from the bodywork, which the Veyron has and also the ME-Four Twelve has. There are also, I believe, probably unintentionally, almost styling cues of cars like the Ford GT90 about the ME-Four Twelve. As I said, I don't believe that's an intentional thing, but it's certainly not a bad thing to look like a Ford GT90. Now, the interesting thing about the Chrysler is it could have been one of the best supercars ever made. And that's not just pie in the sky. It's very realistic. to assume that that would have been the case, for two reasons. One, it would have been, on paper, a direct rival to the Veyron at the time. And the second reason is because of the company which made its engine. AMG, a subsidiary, of course, of Mercedes, their tuning division and engine building division, who also make the engines for two of the most widely loved supercars ever, the Zonda and the Huayra, both, of course, from Pagani. So there's a clear precedent for how good AMG engines are, and that is, of course, not even including how good the engines in actual AMG Mercedes models are. They're known for being incredible engine builders. This car featured one, a 6-litre quad turbo, or 4 turbos, V12 engine from AMG. Similar in on-paper spec, at least as far as the 6-litre V12, to Mercedes' ultimate supercar, the CLK GTR. The car wasn't made, though, partially, it's believed, due to complaints from the SLR building division of Mercedes, who were, of course, the team overseeing the what was soon to be released SLR McLaren from Mercedes, one of my personal favourite cars. And you can understand why that is probably true. Consider the comparisons. You're talking about a quad-turbo V12 hyper-American ultimate supercar with 4 turbos, 850 horsepower, 850 foot-pounds of torque, a 7-speed gearbox, a 0 to 60 time that's believed to be under 3 seconds, and a top speed in excess of 240. That would have automatically made the ME-Four Twelve on the same level as the Koenigsegg's, McLarens, Veyrons, etc. of the supercar class. The SLR, on the other hand, is certainly not a bad car, but it's nowhere near that level. It's a 208 mph machine, which goes more head-to-head against cars like the Carrera GT. As I said, not a bad thing by any means, but certainly no Veyron peer. The ME-Four Twelve would have been a peer to the Veyron, though, and that would have seriously overshadowed the SLR. And it's a shame that that happened, because had the SLR come out at a different time, we may well have seen the ME-Four Twelve go into production. Possibly limited production, but production nonetheless. We could have actually seen how fast it really was. And Chrysler did say, both before and after the issues with the SLR, that they did want to put the ME-Four Twelve into production, so it's a real shame that that didn't happen. Now, as far as how it would fit into the game, it would fit in very well. And I say that about every car in the series, but that's because I don't choose rubbish cars. The ME-Four Twelve would be one of the fastest supercars in the game, but in one way in particular, Special Stage Route X racing. A lot of people who play Gran Turismo aren't interested in racing on Special Stage Route X. They consider it to be completely boring, driving around in circles, lap after lap. And I can understand that. On most tracks, even oval tracks, that would be the case for me as well. I get bored of oval tracks very quickly. But I'm not quite sure what it is. It's hard to quantify. But Special Stage Route X isn't like any other oval track. And it's not just the size of the track. There's something about it which is different. It keeps the interest there. Despite having done around 150,000 miles on that track on Gran Turismo 6 alone, I still love it. And it's great for drag racing, cruising, racing in general. And this car would be perfect for those things. Perfect for drag racing, perfect for top speed racing, dependent of course on the handling, but pretty much a definite for fantastic top speed racing potential. Fully tuned, surely it would easily put out over 1,000 horsepower. It only weighs less than 1,300 kilos anyway, which is remarkably good given that it is a luxuriously equipped supercar anyway. And you've got yourself easily one of the quickest straight-line machines on Gran Turismo. And considering the cars that are already among the quickest in a straight line, quite a few of them are American. Not all of them, some of them aren't quite as quick as they deserve to be, but in general, on Gran Turismo, the Vipers, the Corvettes, the Ford GT, and various other American cars are very fast in a straight line, both for acceleration and top speed, in some cases the quickest in their class. Now, the ME-Four Twelve is an ultra rare car, obviously being a concept, and it should be expensive. I'm not sure exactly how expensive I'd like it to be, but the number that comes to mind is 2.5 million. Some people may think that's too much for this car, and I can understand you saying that. But 2.5 million to me sounds like an interesting price. I can imagine the car being in the dealership, and a price tag of 2.5 million next to this car would look right to me. 2.5 million makes it pretty much the most expensive supercar in the game, but isn't that appropriate? It's Veyron level, superior to a Veyron around the track without a doubt, and rarer. So why shouldn't it cost 500,000 credits more? In fully detailed form, it could be an incredible machine. With a Mercedes or AMG V12, it sounds fantastic as well. And the ME-Four Twelve is one of those cars which is almost surprising that it hasn't been featured on GranTurismo by now, having been featured on Forza, Test Drive Unlimited, and a variety of other games. But overall, I think the PP of this car would be somewhere in the region of 650, possibly more, maybe even 670, but I would have thought around 650 in stock form, obviously with upgraded tyres, suspension, gearbox, possibly power and weight, you could take that higher, especially if a future Gran Turismo game takes things like tyres and suspension into account under PP regulations, because it's kind of ridiculous that it doesn't. As I've proved from my Sleeper Spec series, you can take a car which, to all intents and purposes, is stock, but certainly isn't. So I personally hope that they update that in the future of Gran Turismo. That will eliminate that almost advantage, as it were, of being able to upgrade the tyres, etc., without it affecting the PP. But it affects the PI, as it's called on Forza, and it works beautifully, because the PI system works well. Because fitting a car with something like racing tyres or racing brakes, it should increase the PP, because it's making the vehicle better. The way Gran Turismo does it is just power and weight, which is a little bit narrow-minded, considering how much quicker you can make a car without increasing the power or decreasing the weight. But that's kind of a side issue. For now, the ME-Four Twelve I think would be a fantastic addition to the supercar lineup on GT7, or possibly GT Sport, but highly unlikely. And overall, I would say there is a possible chance for the ME-Four Twelve making it on Gran Turismo. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a good chance, especially given its age now, but there is a possible chance, and I certainly hope that it does end up on the game. But that's it overall for this selection. If you are new to the series, be sure to slap down in the comments below what cars you would love to see featured on Gran Turismo. And it doesn't just have to be one or two, you could put hundreds if you wanted to. And that's it overall. So as always, thanks for watching.